What if the weapon that could save you was the very thing that got you killed? The Panzerfaust was Germany's deadly secret. It was a cheap tube that could turn a peasant into a tank killer with one pull of the trigger. But once that soldier fired, his own death sentence usually began. Why did the second shot almost always mean your last? Let us walk into the rubble and find out. The tank hunter's secret weapon. The Panzerfaust wasn't like the fancy German tanks or the famous 88mm cannons. It was dumb and simple. It was basically a steel tube with a big explosive warhead stuck on the front. It looked like a weapon you could build in your garage, and that's exactly why it was so scary. Any German soldier could carry one. He didn't need a crew, he didn't need a truck to tow it. He just needed to hide, wait, and get close. Really close. The Panzerfaust was a short-range weapon. The most common version, the Panzerfaust 60, had a range of about 60 meters. Think about a football field. You're only a little more than half the length away from the goal line. That's how close a soldier had to be to kill a tank. He had to let the big metal monster rumble right past him, or creep up on it in the dark. He had to be brave, or crazy, or both. When he pulled the trigger, a small charge launched the warhead down the tube. It flew pretty slow, too. You could almost watch it travel through the air, but once it hit the tank, it was over. The Panzerfaust used something called a shaped charge. You don't need to know the science, but you need to know what it did. When the warhead hit the steel armor, it didn't just bang into it. It created a super hot jet of metal, like a blowtorch going 1,000 miles an hour. It burned right through the tank's armor like a hot knife through butter. Once that jet got inside the tank, it would set fire to everything. It would ignite the fuel. It would set off the ammunition. The crew had 1 or 2 seconds to get out. If they were lucky, they could jump out and run, but they would still be on fire. Their skin would burn. If they couldn't get out, the flames would burn so hot that there would be nothing left but ashes and bones. This is why the Panzerfaust worked best in cities or forests. A British tank commander named Stuart Hills found this out the hard way. It was September 1944 in the Belgian city of Giel. His unit, the Sherwood Rangers, rolled into town in their Sherman tanks. At first, it was great. The Germans seemed to be gone. The local people were happy. They hung out Belgian flags to celebrate being freed from the Germans. Hills and his men felt like heroes. But the good feeling didn't last. Word came that German troops had snuck back in and cut off the road behind them. They were surrounded. Suddenly, the happy town felt like a trap. The civilians took their flags down. That made the tankers even more nervous. As night fell, the tanks parked in the main square, pointing their guns down every street. They heard noises. They saw shapes moving. They fought off some small attacks. They even knocked out a big German Jagdpanther tank destroyer. They were winning. Then the sun came up. Hills was in his tank when he heard a deafening bang. He looked over and saw the Sherman tank parked right next to his. It was on fire. Huge flames were pouring out of it. It had been hit by a Panzerfaust. The driver inside was killed instantly. The tank's commander, a captain named Jimmy McWilliam, managed to jump out, but he was terribly burned. In just 1 second, his world had turned from survival to agony. He was lucky to be alive, but his life would never be the same. When a Panzerfaust hit you, it was just a game of luck whether you lived or died. But what about the German soldier who fired it? Was he safe? Was he lucky? We'll get to that, because for him, the danger was just beginning. One-shot weapon for a one-way trip. The German soldier has done his job. The Panzerfaust fired true. The Sherman tank is burning. But now the soldier has a new problem. He is holding an empty tube. He has no weapon left. And everyone who saw that shot is now coming to kill him. This was the terrible truth about the Panzerfaust. It was dangerous for the tank crew, yes, but it was just as dangerous for the man firing it. In some ways, it was even worse for him. Let us start with the backblast. The Panzerfaust was what soldiers call a recoilless weapon. When you pulled the trigger, the warhead shot forward out of the tube. But at the same time, a huge blast of fire and gas shot out the back. This was not a little puff of smoke. It was a roaring jet of flame that could reach several meters behind the shooter. The German army had a very clear rule about this. Do not stand within 10 meters of the back of a Panzerfaust when someone fires it. 10 meters is about 30 feet. If you were standing behind the shooter, you would be hit by a wall of fire. Your clothes would catch fire, your skin would burn, you could die. This meant the soldier had to check his surroundings before firing. He could not shoot from inside a small room unless the back of the tube was pointing out a window or door. He could not fire from a narrow alley unless he made sure no one was behind him. Many German soldiers burned to death because they fired from a basement or a tight space, and the backblast bounced off the wall and cooked them alive. But the backblast was only one danger. The bigger problem was the range. Early versions of the Panzerfaust, called the Panzerfaust 30, had an effective range of only 30 meters. That is about 90 feet. A tank moving at even slow speed covers that distance in seconds. The soldier had to let the tank come almost right on top of him before he fired. He had to stay hidden while a 30-ton machine rumbled toward him. He had to hear the engine roar and feel the ground shake. He had to stay perfectly still and hope no one saw him. If the tank crew spotted him first, he was dead. The tank's machine guns would cut him down. The tank could just run over him and crush him. He had no armor, no protection, just a thin steel tube and a lot of luck. Now imagine he fires and hits the tank. Great, the tank is burning. But what about the other tanks? What about the infantry following behind? They all just saw where that shot came from. They all saw the smoke trail. They know exactly where he is hiding. And here is the worst part. The Panzerfaust was a one-shot weapon. You could not reload it. You could not fire a second shot. Once you pulled the trigger, you were holding a useless piece of metal. You had no weapon left. And the enemy was coming for you with rifles, machine guns, and grenades. They were angry because you just killed their friends, and you had no way to fight back. The German army trained soldiers to fire and then run. Do not stay to watch the explosion. Do not check if the tank is really destroyed. Just drop the tube and get out. Crawl through rubble, hide in cellars. Get as far away as possible before the Allied soldiers reach your position. But running was not easy. The Panzerfaust worked best in cities, where tanks had to move slowly through narrow streets. That same city environment made it easy for Allied infantry to hunt down the men who fired them. They would swarm into the buildings. They would clear every room. They would shoot anyone holding a weapon. Many German soldiers never got the chance to run. They fired their Panzerfaust, watched the tank burn, and then died a second later as bullets tore through them. They traded their life for a tank. Sometimes that was the plan. By 1944, Germany was so short on tanks and trained crews that killing an enemy tank was worth losing an infantryman. It was a trade they were willing to make. But the soldiers doing the firing did not want to die. They wanted to live. They wanted to go home. They did not want to die in a foreign city holding an empty tube. Think about that soldier in Giel who shot the Sherman next to Stuart Hills. He fired once. He hit his target. The tank burned. Captain McWilliam jumped out with his skin melting. It was a perfect shot. But what about the German soldier? He had to run through streets filled with enemy soldiers. He had no weapon. He had no backup. He had maybe 30 seconds to get away before the hunters found him. And most likely, he didn't make it. The Panzerfaust had a dark nickname among German soldiers. They called it the one-shot wonder. You got one shot. Make it count. Because after that, you were either dead or running for your life. And if you tried to take a second shot with another Panzerfaust, good luck. By the time you grabbed a second tube, aimed and fired, the enemy would be on top of you. Old men and boys. By the end of World War II, Germany was desperate. The army had lost millions of men. There was almost no one left to fight. So who picked up the Panzerfaust? Old men and young boys. The Volkssturm was the last line of defense. These were men in their 60s and 70s who thought their fighting days were long over. Some had fought in the First World War 30 years earlier. Now they were handed a Panzerfaust and told to stop Soviet tanks. They had no proper training, no real uniform, just an armband and a tube with a bomb on the end. Then there was the Hitler Youth. Boys 14, 15, 16 years old. Kids who should have been in school or playing football. Instead, they were hiding in the ruins of Berlin, waiting to die for a lost cause. These were not soldiers. They were civilians with a weapon they barely understood. The fighting in Berlin was the worst of the war. The city was already rubble. Buildings were hollow shells. Streets were blocked with debris. Soviet tanks rolled through this nightmare, grinding forward block by block. And hiding in the cellars and behind broken walls were children and grandfathers holding Panzerfausts. A 14-year-old boy hears the rumble of tank treads. He peeks out from a basement window. A Soviet T-34 is coming down the street. It is huge. It is covered with infantry soldiers holding machine guns. The boy is terrified. His hands are shaking. He has been told to wait until the tank is close, then pop up, aim, and fire. He does it. The tank explodes. For 1 second, he feels like a hero. Then the Soviet infantry open fire. They have seen where the shot came from. Dozens of machine gun bullets tear into the basement. The boy does not even have time to run. He dies holding his empty Panzerfaust. This scene played out thousands of times in Berlin. The streets of Berlin were filled with empty Panzerfaust tubes. They lay next to the bodies of old men and children. The weapon that could destroy a tank had not saved them. It didn't even give them a chance to take another shot.